Now we will have a presentation on the promise of the BRICS from Rachel Brinkley, who is a leader of the LaRouche Political Action Committee Policy Committee and a well-known candidate for office and notorious freedom fighter. So listen carefully to what Rachel has to say about the promise of this moment.
Hello. Those are some interesting subtitles there. But in addition to the potential, I do want to start with the danger, as Helga LaRouche just introduced her discussion, which was the danger of war with Russia, imminent, as we see with the situation in Ukraine. And the intention has been for China as well. Those have been the two real targets of the international regime change policy. She mentioned the warnings of the Secretary General of NATO, the Prime Minister of Slovakia, who said there's a 70% chance right now of a NATO-Russia conflict. And this is not being instigated by Russia, although that is what the media will tell you. There are no Russian troops in Ukraine. I do want to start just with a little example of that. If we could have the first slide on the expansion of NATO. It could be argued or questioned why NATO still exists after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, and especially why it has spread since the dissolution of the Soviet Union to the borders of Russia. This is not something unbeknownst to Russia. Last year there was a security conference where the policy of the United States in the West of the Colored Revolution was detailed clearly by Russian military figures, including the Defense Secretary Shoigu. Next slide. And this is from a presentation at that conference where they're discussing the policy of the Colored Revolution. And you can see there's quite a few of them that have spread the globe in the last decade or so, 20 years. They talk about the first Iraq war and Afghanistan as part of that as well. But that the model of the Colored Revolution is for the idea that it's supposedly a peaceful protest run by the people of the country who are upset about the regime and things like this. And there won't be discussion of military use at the beginning, unless the peaceful protest is unsuccessful, and then you see what happened in Libya and Syria, and the military is brought in openly as a tool for regime change. And now you have the current confusion in Syria. Are we fighting ISIS or are we fighting Assad? And the US military is saying this is incompetent because we're fighting two parties in the same country, and how are we ever going to win? That's really why the Defense Secretary Hegel was just fired, because he said, what are we doing there? So they're very clear. A message from Putin was delivered at this conference as well. So this is coming from the top. Just last week in the State of the Union speech, their version of the State of the Union speech, Putin gave it another talk of the imminence of his defense of Russian sovereignty over all else. And he was forced to say, by the current conditions, as discussed with the NATO warnings, that no one will ever attain military superiority over Russia. They have tested their entire triad of nuclear arsenal over the last several months, and they're expanding their military. And this, what Mr. LaRouche said, Ms. Helga LaRouche's husband, an American political statesman, said, people say that Russia is bankrupt. That's the line going around right now. They've just got a bunch of rusty junk. It says this is not true. The United States is bankrupt. Russia is preparing for world war. You're not bankrupt if you're building up this type of military power, and this is due to what we see here. One more slide. This one you can see on the left. Just goes through some of the methods. Mercenaries, terrorism, extremism, transborder crimes. And on the right, incitement of color revolutions in Ukraine. The top left is the peaceful protesters of the colored revolution in Ukraine. We can see what's on their armband. Those are also on their uniforms that they're wearing in eastern Ukraine right now. And this is what's being supported by Victoria Nuland. Obama is a puppet government in Kiev, which is an outright Nazi organization. And on the right is a firebombing, essentially, of a city of Odessa in Ukraine, which was done by the Kiev-supported peaceful protesters as well. So what this has done has created a system of failed states or states on the edge of failing around the country, extreme instability. Since 2001, the University of Maryland just came out with a study that the terrorism has increased tenfold in the world since 2001, since the beginning of the war on terrorism. So this is what we see here. Afghanistan as well, after 10 years of war, has a 30-fold increase in drug production. So we also see this in other countries now. The Hong Kong situation in China, which is also run by some of the same organizations, National Endowment for Democracy, which funded the Ukrainian protests. And you're also seeing this in Mexico, Czech Republic. Any nation that's starting to go with the BRICS is being targeted by these colored revolutions. So also in the United States, what we're seeing is the effect of the same type of thing, where the recent protests in Ferguson are one example. This is not natural. This is not an inborn process of the United States. This is manufactured to get people into conflict on the lowest common denominator with each other, as opposed to what unifies us, which is always what has made our nation unique and really characterized us. This is an external operation. So we see, people are here today because we see the conditions in the United States of economic collapse. 1 in 30 children in the United States is homeless. I mean, and you compare this with what we're beginning to present here with the question of the BRICS and the renaissance going on in the world. We don't see this in the United States right now. In fact, people aren't even aware that it's happening. All we're given on our television is ISIS and the latest person, we're supposed to hate, to go to war with. But we're not being told about these wonderful developments. And what is scary is a poll that came out recently that most Americans think that the future is going to be worse than the past. And this has never characterized the United States. We always had the idea of giving something better to the next generation, building, sacrificing, and giving something better. That's not the case here now. It is the case in the BRICS countries, where they do see optimism, and the young people are happy and optimistic. And I can go through a little bit of the BRICS, what that means. If people don't know, there was a major conference in Fortaleza, Brazil in July, which consolidated a lot of this intention to help create a new just economic system with means for development for all, not run by Wall Street, not run by a private bank, World Bank, or anybody else in DC, New York, or London. And this represents over 50% of the world's population, the nations in Russia, China, India, South Africa. This is a major powerhouse. So as Helga referenced, they established a new development bank with $100 billion to fund for development and any country that wants it. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which the United States tried to stop, was unable to. Most of Asia has joined it. This is also credit for development. Maritime Silk Road funding, contingency reserve arrangement, $100 billion, massive amounts of, well, could be more, but massive beginnings of credit for development with a clear intention. And next slide. Okay, this is the offer when President Obama was in China for the APEC summit about a week ago, maybe 2 now. This was spoken to him at the podium a few feet away by the president of China. He said, "China is ready to work with the United States to make efforts in a number of priority areas and putting into effect such principles as non-confrontation, non-conflict, mutual respect, and win-win cooperation." And we think the United States should take up this offer. Helga LaRouche said if we don't, that this will determine civilization. Whether or not the United States takes up this offer is a turning point of civilization. What President Xi is also discussing, as he says here, with win-win cooperation, is the idea of a new Silk Road, an economic program for the development of all of Eurasia and extending into the southern hemisphere as well. Next slide. Oh, there's the BRICS countries. Next one. And that's them with the South American heads of state in July. Next slide. This is the ancient Silk Road, the trade route between Europe and China, which was the idea not just of transfer of goods, but transfer of technology, culture, and ideas. Iron production, silk production, porcelain, gunpowder, paper, book printing. These were all technologies traded between the civilizations, China, Europe, Iran. And now, with the new Silk Road, the idea is for the same thing with modern technologies. And next. So this is the proposal by China, a maritime Silk Road and a corridor through the land, through Central Asia, to Europe, to develop the areas along the way. Just as we saw with the transcontinental railroad in the United States, which unified the nation, opened up areas for development through communication, the ability to bring in goods for development, et cetera, building cities, building civilization. And it's what makes sense. I mean, just think about whether you would want to, take an extra hour to get to work, driving through, around some non-developed area, or would you rather go the most direct route? Would you rather take the best route in a car? Would you rather take the best form of transportation? Would you rather have your city organized so that you could get to work easily? You would prefer what makes sense. And this is what this is. It's what makes sense. It's the development of the potential that's there to be developed. So everyone has the opportunity to do what the United States and other developed countries have done. Also, one point on the new technologies, also with China, their program for fusion, space research. They are putting mankind at a new frontier where we can discover new principles about how the universe is organized, how the solar system, how the galaxies function, and about how mankind thinks, ourselves, how we know ourselves. And this is something that Helga LaRouche and the Schiller Institute and her husband have been fighting for 40 years. So, next slide. This was the proposal in 1976 written by Mr. LaRouche for the New Development Bank, for the International Development Bank, the model for the New Development Bank now being adopted. Okay, next. This was the non-aligned movement, which Mr. LaRouche and Helga organized in 1976 to adopt the plan for a new just global economic system, a debt moratorium, and a source of global credit, a development bank. On the right is Fred Wills bringing this to the UN, introducing this to the UN. Let's see, next one. This is the LaRouches in India, 1982, campaigning for the development and industrialization of India. They met with Indira Gandhi and worked with her on these policies for development. Okay, next. This is the LaRouches in 1982, meeting with President, well, he's not in the picture, but Lopez Portillo in Mexico, organizing him, which he accepted the idea for a debt moratorium of the South American countries, which was later sabotaged by some of the Wall Street forces, but the president of Mexico went with it. Okay, next. Fall of the Berlin Wall. Okay, next. After that, Helga campaigned for the productive triangle, saying that with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, it was time for a new system of cooperation and development of Eastern Europe and Eurasia. And the plan was do this through Paris, Berlin, Vienna as a locomotive of development in Europe that would then be able to export technologies through development corridors to Africa, Eastern Europe, and she said most especially to the Southern Hemisphere for development. And next slide. That's her in China in 1996, campaigning for the Silk Road. Next. And 1997, we proposed the Eurasian Landbridge, which was the advancement of the productive triangle to expand it to the entire world, or Eurasia. Okay, next. This is Helga again with the president of Mexico in 1988, I believe, where he called for a new just global economic order. Next. The LaRouches testified at the Russian Duma, the Ministry of Economics. That's Sergei Glaziev, who is a current advisor to President Putin, who brought them in to speak. This is at a press conference. Okay, next. This is the LaRouches in India, where they also met with the president and prime minister and members of parliament. Okay, next. And this is recently Helga's recent trip to China, where she went to over a dozen seminars, conferences, television interviews, and was called the Silk Road Lady. Her speeches are often on Xinhua, which is the official media for the Chinese government, and she's known as the Silk Road Lady. Okay, a couple more shots. That's at a CC television interview, which you could see here in the United States. One more. That's at the One Belt, One Road conference in Beijing. There's been a series of conferences around the New Silk Road in Europe, or in Asia, especially in China. This was in Beijing. There have not been many in the United States until now, until our series of conferences. The Schiller Institute. Okay, next. Okay, and in 2012, the BRICS countries held a summit where they issued a call for a new just global economic order and called for the establishment of the new development bank, which has now put online in 2014. So this has been, as we saw here, 30, 40 years of work by the LaRouches to overcome the system of Wall Street and empire dominating the planet and open up the ability for nations to govern themselves and to collaborate around the development of mankind. So we see here, this is from our new report. This is the updated version of all the projects. I'm not going to go through it all now. Next slide. This is the idea of a development corridor, as mentioned earlier, with the Transcontinental Railroad, building not just a rail line, but all the related infrastructure that goes with it: power, oil, water for irrigation, developed roads, new cities. Yeah, so this is the idea. Next slide. The president of China has been traveling, bringing about this system. This is one example of a project in Central Asia of how the black lines, which are the new Silk Road, can be extended to the blue lines to open up all these different areas. Okay, next one. This is the idea from Russia to develop Afghanistan, to end the opium production in Afghanistan by bringing industry from Russia, by making Afghanistan an industrial center, using the capabilities in Russia, in eastern Russia, the science cities, for the technology and goods and equipment to export and develop this area along the way, which is what? A drug haven. They want to dry up the drugs with industry. It's called the New Central East. Okay, next. And this is the south to north water transfer project of China. This is something we need in the Southwest with our drought. 99% of California in severe drought. And we're talking about moving people out of California. China is moving the water to where the people are, which is a sane approach. Okay, next. This is their high-speed rail system. They have 30,000, or moving in on 30,000 miles of high-speed rail. We have not one. The blue is the high-speed rail. Okay, next. This is what's going up in Egypt, the new Suez Canal, which was interesting as it was funded by state bonds. It was funded by the people of Egypt. The new president, El-Sisi, who overcame a colored revolution, dumped the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. People probably remember the violence there about a year ago or less. They've been transformed. They're moving forward. He's got a program for the many young people of Egypt to get jobs building the canal, which has already broken ground. And the funds for it were raised in 8 days by the Egyptian people. Large. Okay, next. This is the canal project. This is now under discussion more seriously under China's program. This is something we campaign for as well. 20% of the world's trade goes through the Strait of Malacca, which is very narrow. We could build a canal and make it much more efficient. Okay, next. This is existing and proposed rail in Africa. China is connecting all the capitals of Africa with high-speed rail. What we see on the left is existing, and this is the footprint of the colonial policy of exporting raw materials and not developing the country. So, okay, next. This is the South America. There's now going up a canal, a new canal, Panama Canal in Nicaragua, which Helga mentioned, 50,000 jobs, a new city, 2 ports, and they're discussing this in real physical terms, not monetary terms. There's also a plan for rail, intercontinental rail, which South America also doesn't have. It's been like Africa, from Brazil to Peru, which China is going to help build. And we spoke with the project manager of the Nicaragua Canal project at a presentation he gave. And he said, you know, look, don't believe the lies about China where they say that the Chinese people are getting all the jobs. It's not true. They're doing what they have to, but the rest of the jobs are going to Nicaraguans. Okay, next. There's the canal. Okay, next. And the Bering Strait project is something that's been, well, actually on the books since the 1800s as a plan. The Schiller Institute revived it as part of the Eurasian Landbridge. In 2007, this was the subject of a conference sponsored by the Russian government, Ministry of Commercial Transportation, or something like this. Mr. LaRouche was invited to attend. He sent a paper to be read at the conference. China is now very interested in this project, which is a tunnel or bridge, although I think the current proposal is a tunnel under the Bering Strait to unify, as you see, the rail systems of the world and dramatically change the characteristic of global trade and transportation. And go to the next slide. This was a proposal from 1898. You see it on the top there. Okay, next. And then this is gives you a sense of why this would be a good idea, which is looking from the North Pole, the geography of the planet. Oh, you can't really see the distances on there. Tokyo to Ireland are the 2 points. On the top left, it's Ireland is the city on the left and Tokyo on the right. The blue route along the bottom, I believe, is through the Suez Canal. And the top route is through the Northwest Passage, which goes above Russia, through the Arctic Passage, which you can take by ship. It's much shorter. On the bottom is the difference between the Panama Canal and going through the passage above North America in the Arctic, and it's much shorter. So it's a much shorter distance between the Americas and Asia to go this route in this direction. Okay, so just, these are, as mentioned, this is different, right? This is not Wall Street. This is not, bottom-up approach. What job can I get? Where can my kid get a job when they get out of college? Maybe they're going to work at Starbucks. Maybe, there's just no future in what we've been doing. But with this, you get a sense it is an entirely new paradigm. And we're going to discuss this more throughout the discussions today, what that means. But the differences between the culture of no progress or the culture of optimism, and that is really human. We have minds. We enjoy using minds to solve problems and create new conditions that didn't occur before us. And every single individual human has the power to do that, to transform the universe through their discoveries and ideas. So I did have some other quotes from President Xi, which are pretty interesting. I don't know if I want to read. Maybe I'll end with one. And this is at a recent conference of the China-Arab States Cooperation Forum about a week or two ago, between Arab nations and China. And President Xi said, quote, "Now we should carry forward the Silk Road spirit, rejuvenate our countries." And he quoted an old Chinese saying, quote, "5 colors, when shining upon each other, will add beauty to each other. 8 musical instruments, when played together, will make a harmonious melody." He says, this is the spirit, not one nation dominating others, but a harmony that develops all.